G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. We're just going to have a bit of a look at background briefing, or a listen to background briefing, talking about neo-Nazis in Australia, actual genuine ones.
Has been actively recruiting in Australia. Alex Mann has an award. Before we start, the program contains racist hate speech and strong language.
It's late 2019, and this young Australian guy is driving towards Bunbury on a highway just south of Perth.
There we go. Yep, now everyone can hear everyone.
To the people on the call, he's just known as Volkskrieger.
Volkskrieger, can you say something real quick?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I got you.
It's a hot day, so he's got the car's air conditioning cranked up full bore. Voices cut in and out over the whirring sound. Volkskrieger is being that guy on the conference call.
Volkskrieger, you got your AC is kind of drowning out the call a little bit. Sorry, yes. I'm in my car. Sorry, yeah, no. I'll keep my muted as much as I can. Okay.
So far, all of this just sounds like your average business call, but it is not an average business call at all. This is actually an online meeting of militant white supremacists from all over the world. The men on this call are in Perth, California, and Russia, and they go by names like Matthias, TMB, and Roman Spear. They're all members of a group called The Base, and they've got no idea that right now they're being covertly recorded.
Yeah, this thing's staying right now. They're trying other ways to shut us down.
They get straight to work because they think that this is a safe space to talk, and so they outline their plans for Australia.
So we think that there's a lot of potential there.
They want to create a cell around Perth.
If we could get 2, 3, maybe 5, 6 eventually, I would consider that to be a pretty big success.
They've set up this meeting to do vetting interviews with potential recruits, testing them out to see if they're a good fit. And this one's for a guy who calls himself Advocate Cannibalism.
Good shock value for the next article. Exactly.
But they have to figure out how to add him to the call.
Yeah, he's in the chat room. I told him to join the call. Oh, okay. Hello. Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, so I'm James from Australia.
Volkskrieger listens from his car as his US colleagues pepper the potential new recruit with questions.
Okay. How old are you?
I'm 36.
Okay, what's your ethnicity?
Master race.
The Base is a neo-Nazi terrorist organisation. They advocate violence. Some members call the Christchurch shooter a saint. Online, members have shared manuals for bomb-making, guerrilla warfare, and lone wolf terror attacks. The leaders seek to recruit people with military experience, and they've organised weapons training camps. These guys mean business. They want to live in a whites-only world, and they believe that the best way to do that is to incite a race war. These calls show them establishing cells to carry out their plan, seeking recruits to help bring on the collapse of society. They've conducted more than 100 interviews like these with men from all around the world in an intentional, coordinated recruitment drive.
We want people who are self-motivated, who think the mission is important enough that they want to be involved and do what it takes.
Well, I have experience in martial arts. I have a home gym with a bench press, 2 punching bags, and jiu-jitsu mats. Ordered training knives. I have firearms and access to properties to shoot on. I have trained Krav Maga for about 4 months. I've also Irish boxing, so yeah, I know how to fuck people up with minimum physical exertion.
So I think what it sounds like is we have very similar goals. So I do think our efforts will complement each other perfectly. All right, then we will be in touch. Have a good one.
No, thank you, guys.
Advocate Cannibalism leaves the call, and the group's leader asks Volkskrieger for his thoughts.
So what do you think? How do you think that went?
guy calling himself TMB weighs in.
Team B, what do you think? Seemed pretty good.
But he's a bit worried about the candidate's partner because she's 1/16 Jewish.
Too excited about the 1/16th part with his wife, but right.
This guy, TMB, will later be charged with conspiring to murder anti-fascist activists. But today, his objections aren't enough to stop Advocate Cannibalism from moving one step closer to membership of the base.
And most Peter feels good about him and comfortable with him, then that's pretty much good enough. Alright, ready to go, guys. Hang in there, it's gonna be fine. No, alright. White power.
These guys like to think that they're on the vanguard, that they're smart, careful, and secretive. But as this interview took place, they'd already been infiltrated. More than 80 hours of interviews like these were recorded in total. Potential recruits from Britain, America, Canada, and Australia. Eventually, those Australian recordings found their way to me. There are 5 of them, and they've never been heard publicly before.
Have you read Mein Kampf?
Yes, I have.
It's interviewing for a job as a foot soldier, isn't it?
I take it you don't believe that there's a political solution?
No, definitely not. We are not voting our way out of this.
This whole interview process is about their preclusion to violence.
Well, National Socialism is the worldview of the eternal truth.
I've seen and experienced and talked to enough Muslims to just know, like, I fucking hate them.
As long as people are white and they're willing to fight for what's white.
We also have a handful of members who are under investigation and or on the FBI terrorist watch list.
This is a threat that is present and imminent, and it needs to be taken seriously. It's already here. There's no more time to prepare for when it comes. It's already here.
So when Terrence did what he did, and everyone's saying he's an alt-right fascist Nazi, blah, 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 I'm like, well, if that's what he is, then, okay, I'll just be that. If you want me to be the boogeyman, then I guess I'm the fucking boogeyman as well, because I fully, wholeheartedly agree with what he did.
This is part 1 of the base tapes, a special 2-part series for background briefing. I'm going to investigate how global neo-Nazi terror groups are systematically targeting young Australians for recruitment as part of their plan to incite a global race war. Over the next 2 episodes, I'll use these recordings to uncover the group's secret strategies. As I scour the tapes for clues, I'll be looking for anything that'll help identify the Australians, anything that'll tell me who they really are and how they were targeted.
Hey, how you going?
The story of how I first got hold of these recordings starts with this guy.
Yes, my name is Jason Wilson. I am a journalist, freelance journalist.
Jason publishes with organisations like The Guardian and the Southern Poverty Law Centre in the US. He was born in Townsville, North Queensland, but he moved to the States about 8 years ago.
And since then, really, I've been an investigative journalist focused on stuff going on here in the United States. So, since early 2014, I've been on this beat, as it were.
Jason watched and reported as the number of violent right-wing attacks grew.
There was kind of a lot going on and a lot bubbling up under the surface that people hadn't yet come to grips with.
Jason was there in Charlottesville in August 2017 for the Unite the Right rally, when hundreds of neo-Nazis, white nationalists and militiamen clashed violently with anti-fascists.
It was a day I'll never forget.
One neo-Nazi drove a car into a crowd of peaceful protesters, killing a woman and wounding nearly 30 others.
And that was a kind of another turning point. It became clear to anyone who could see how dangerous this movement was, how it had managed to recruit so many young men
and radicalised them to the extent that they were prepared to march with their bases bare in support of racism.
Then, in mid-2018, Jason noticed a new hardcore group pop up. It was called The Base, and its imagery and ideology mirrored the most extreme groups out there. Its members spoke and wrote to each other via an encrypted messaging service called Wire.
This encryption means that unless you're in the chat, there's no way you're ever going to find out what people are saying.
But it turns out that The Base had already been infiltrated, and while it planned its expansion to Europe, South Africa, and Australia, an insider was making secret recordings and passing them on to Jason.
When I first heard these recordings, I was amazed. I recognised immediately that this was an unparalleled kind of insight into the genesis of an extremist group, the recruitment of radicalised individuals to an extremist group.
Jason published an article that identified the guy leading the vetting interviews. The leader of The Base was unmasked as Ronaldo Nazzaro.
The questions are kind of designed to be
a former security contractor living with his wife in Russia.
So there's no right or wrong answer for most of these questions.
He's 47 years old this year. He was born in 1974. His role in The Base was, the mastermind, the figurehead, the leader, really, of this organisation. But most of the recruits were far, far younger than him. A lot of the guys who involved themselves with this organisation were in their teens or early 20s. So, in some cases less than half his age. And many of them are now being prosecuted for crimes that they committed while they were members of the group.
One US member of The Base was arrested for spray painting a swastika on a synagogue. 3 other members in the US are awaiting trial for making meticulous plans to murder anti-fascist activists. I've seen a signed police affidavit that alleges they plan to use revolvers, wear boots and gloves secured to their clothes with heavy tape, and put Vaseline on their eyebrows, all to avoid dropping forensic evidence at the crime scene.
People who have been charged with murder plots, with being members of a street gang, with defacing synagogues, have all done so as members of The Base, and in their view, have done those things as expressions of that group's ideology.
Some of The Base's other leaders have also been linked to terrorists in the UK. The UK's youngest ever terror offender, a 16-year-old who was convicted after he tried to buy ammonium nitrate to make a bomb, had been radicalised on another forum set up by one of The Base's senior leaders. But here in Australia, The Base isn't currently listed as a terrorist organisation. So even though the network specifically targeted this country to create new cells, the Australians submitting applications or joining The Base have, as far as we know, faced no consequences. In your view, do you think it's important to find these people, to identify them, and why?
Fundamentally, as a matter of public safety, how do you create a white ethno-state in a country with people who aren't white living in it? Well, either you ask them nicely to move out and they do so, or you're going to have to coerce them or eliminate them. If you believe that there's a kind of human flood of non-white people who are going to wipe away your culture, you're very likely to respond with violence at some point.
So Jason decided to pass the tapes on to me. Do you have any advice, I guess, for me in approaching any of the people that appear on these recordings?
Be careful. As I said, violence is built into this movement. These people are a danger to other people around you. Your friends, your workmates, your neighbours, to people who don't measure up to their criteria of who's human and who isn't. So be careful, but be brave.
So the first thing to do here is just dive into the tapes. Today's date is January, and there is just so much tape.
Economic sabotage, just bombings, arson,
Okay, all right. Slow down there a little bit.
There were over 100 vetting interviews with potential recruits recorded inside the base.
People decide to do outside the base with the training and contacts they make is their business. You know, and we don't really need to know about it.
And what Jason's given me is just the 5 recordings that involve the base's attempts to recruit Australians. And even those seem endless. They all follow a similar formula, with recruiters asking what race the person is.
Anglo-Celtic. Anglo with a little bit of Irish.
They check whether the potential recruit has read certain books. Some advocate terrorism, others anti-Semitism.
Have you read Mein Kampf?
No.
So have you read Mein Kampf?
Yes, I have.
And then they score the candidates and discuss their fit. It's all very HR. But the Australians all use fake names in these interviews. So I start scouring for anything that might identify them. These tapes go on for hours. I've had them for days now. I still haven't actually listened to all of them. They just go on and on and on. Parts of it are just excruciatingly dull. As you listen to it, though, there are these bits and pieces in there that are clearly going to be important. These like little wisps of tantalizing detail that are kind of scattered throughout. This stuff I know is going to be useful. It's going to be helpful. I'm definitely going to need some help on this, and I know there's a guy I've worked with on these stories before. His name is Kevin. Kevin Ewan's a colleague of mine, so when I tell him about the tapes, he's totally up for the challenge. Yeah. How are you going, by the way?
Yeah, good.
You alright?
Yeah, this is kind of this is very classic Kevin white nationalist work.
So, this is not Kevin's first rodeo. His specialty is something called OSINT.
So OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence, and it's just a fancy word for basically finding stuff on the internet that you can get publicly available. But it's just interrogating digital footprints, and they've left a lot, I think.
Like, what kind of stuff stands out to you on the stuff that we've heard so far?
Username and locations are always the biggest ones, and about maybe 8 times out of 10, I can triangulate someone based off those 2 alone. For example, some of them might use the same username for multiple things, including their emails, and that's how we kind of hone in on them.
How likely do you think it is that we will be able to find them?
I think there's a very good chance that we'll be able to uncover them. Some are better than others, but, you know, others are also quite amateurish, or they're not as clever as they think they are.
Some of the senior guys are very careful. They don't really drop hints about their lives outside of the base. But the newbies, they're less careful. They're asked to provide details about themselves in the interview and what they can bring to the base. They talk about their practical skills.
I am a qualified composite technician. So I can use fiberglass and stuff to build boats.
And they talk about their qualifications.
I'm in the middle of doing a security course about to become a security officer, and within 6 months I should have a bodyguard qualification.
This stuff is helpful. I mean, I can check this against public registries. But as we sift through the recordings, we come across one clue that really stands out.
Hi, Will. Can you hear me? Okay, great.
A guy who calls himself Will T. Power is applying to join the base. This is his vetting interview.
All right. This will be about 30 minutes. It could be up to an hour.
This recording is scratchier than the others, so some of the details are a bit harder to make out.
So let's start out with the general question, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a young man in my early 20s, born and raised in WA.
It goes through the usual motions. The leadership asks about his ethnicity.
3 quarts Anglo, 1 quart Dutch.
His fitness.
Fit, I wouldn't say that I'm overly strong, but I'm stronger than most.
He hasn't done the required reading, but he says he gets the gist of it.
They're actually encouraging the fall of the West rather than most people that want to try and save it.
They ask about his political influences, and he proves his racist credentials.
There is no reason, they don't contribute to the economy. There's no reason to have them around. And then gradually I began to hate them, so...
And then the conversation opens up.
Okay, And what organizations are you affiliated with, or are you affiliated with, or have you been affiliated with in the past?
It's here that Will T. Power gives away an incredible detail.
So I've been a member of One Nation for almost a year now.
This guy, who's applying for a spot with a group that's since been prescribed as a terrorist organisation in Canada, was a signed-up member of an Australian political party, Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Then he shares another crucial detail. It turns out he wasn't just a member of One Nation. He actually ran for a seat in Parliament.
Because I actually ran for the last federal election in Australia as a candidate of One Nation.
Will T. Power, for some reason, never actually went through with his application to become a member of the base. But he did run for a seat in Australia's federal parliament, so I want to know who he is. And there are some compelling clues that have been left behind on the internet. In mid-2019, a user with a similar nickname, Will 2 Power this time, instead of Will T Power, uploaded this music to YouTube. It's the Scottish bagpipe classic, Scotland the Brave. But if you were watching this video right now, you'd be seeing just one still image. It's an image of a white, black and red flag, with a Southern Cross in one corner, and a massive swastika right in the middle. After about 3 minutes of all of that, the music comes to an end, and Will to Power speaks.
Welcome. I hope you like the pipes.
Will to Power delivers monologues about religion, nihilist philosophy, and he reads out articles that he's written. All of his videos have been pulled off the internet now, but a group of anti-fascist researchers called the White Rose Society has sent me more than 40 of them.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to read to you an article that I hope to God that I've finally edited properly.
Even he says that sometimes his content can be a bit dull.
The last video I made was a little bit of a ramble.
I'm pretty certain this YouTuber, Will to Power, is the same guy as the Will T Power on the base tapes. They both like Nazi stuff like swastikas for one. They both seem to be involved in One Nation, and they both sound the same.
So in talking to people that think like myself, I was pushed onto the base, and to hell with it, you know, just get these ideas out there. Save the race pretty much, leave a legacy for my children.
So I just need to identify this YouTuber. And that's actually not too hard, because he also interviews other people.
All right, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here with a gentleman I met a few weeks ago, candidate for the Pauline Hanson One Nation Party in the district of Moore.
This is him interviewing another One Nation candidate, a guy called Tyler Walsh.
If you want to introduce yourself, Mr. Walsh.
Yes, sure. Well, I'm a 20-year-old. I'm standing as a candidate for Pauline Hanson's One Nation because I believe that there needs to be...
We got in touch with Tyler Walsh, and he said that he didn't know this guy had connections with neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups when he agreed to do this interview. He also said he strongly condemns neo-Nazism and white supremacy, and that it has no place in Australia whatsoever. And he told us exactly who this guy was. It was none other than the One Nation candidate that year in the seat of O'Connor, Dean Smith.
And that's one thing I like about One Nation candidates is they're all regular Australians just going in there trying to get the job done.
We have, regular everyday Aussies representing regular everyday Aussies.
Finding out Dean Smith's identity is one thing, tracking him down is another. I've got a suburb from his vetting interview and photos of Dean Smith from campaign publicity that he did at the time, but it turns out that none of that's actually very helpful if the name is as common as Dean Smith. I mean, there's even a Liberal senator in WA called Dean Smith, and he is definitely not the Dean I'm looking for. I've tried everything I can to find him. G'day, is that Dean? Consulting real estate, rental and electoral records.
If I could speak to Dean.
I'm called One Nation in WA.
It's not Dean?
Don. They say they've had nothing to do with him since that 2019 election.
So definitely no Dean Smith. Sorry to disturb. Bye-bye.
Eventually I find what I think is the right address. I try to call, but Dean never answers. So I head over there and wait. So we're standing outside Dean Smith's house at the moment. It's about 6 a.m. and we're hoping to catch him just before he heads off to work. Really, this is the end of quite a long search to be able to put just the most important questions to Dean Smith. Why did you try to join the base? Eventually, Dean and some other guy emerge from the house. They're in high-vis shirts, and they look like they're on their way to work. G'day, Dean. How you going? Alex Mann here from the ABC. The other guy puts his sunglasses down over his eyes when he sees me. Dean looks down at the ground and heads straight for the car. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about why you decided to join the base. Dean, can you get out of your car, please? They get in, reverse out of the driveway slowly, and then head off. That day at the house, I left some questions in the mailbox, and I still haven't received a response. As I pore over the details of these tapes, there is another Australian guy that stands out.
There's October.
It's Volkskrieger, the guy who was thinking up the conference call with his air conditioning.
You're talking to Volkskrieger about starting up in Australia.
He's a much more senior operator than the other Aussies. He's kind of like a recruiter himself. So understanding his role and finding out who he is will be key to uncovering the group's recruitment strategy.
Volkskrieger, can you hear Roman? I can't hear him.
He'd made graphics for the group and distributed them online, and he'd been in contact with the base's leadership over the internet for nearly 8 months before these calls.
You stayed committed to the base, and you've done things like actively. You postered, and you produced some content for us. Some graphics that you've been promoting us on Gab.
The base's US leadership trusted him and believed that he was central to their Australian expansion.
We need someone dedicated, who can really kind of lead the charge, and and kind of handle and keep the guys that do come in the door, kind of keep the morale up and keep them motivated.
So they put him in charge of recruitment for Australia and started sending him potential candidates to vet.
I will let those guys know that you are now going to be the recruiters for Australia, and so go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to do the role.
In some ways, he'd already started. He'd already been trying to poach members from other right-wing groups in Western Australia.
I'm just using it as a recruiting ground. I want to see where I can get. I can try and get into the leadership group and then see if I can get into the initial vetting process, because they've got a fairly decent vetting process. So if I can be the main interviewer for that, I can definitely suss out straight away which people I can go, okay, I can get a nice personal relationship with this guy going and slowly bring him over to the base. So
yeah, I think you got the right idea. Just keep your eyes open, and I'm sure you will find some promising candidates.
Once he was appointed as a recruiter, Volkskrieger took a methodical approach to his new role. He interviewed each candidate by email 3 times, collated their responses, and sent them back to the base leadership with a brief summary of his own at the top. In one of the summaries, there's an incredible detail that we can't go into too much, but it's now clear that Volkskrieger was in touch with at least one recruit who's since come to the attention of authorities. Volkskrieger's key role for the base makes it crucial that we track him down. But Kevin and I are having trouble. Have you found anything yet?
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of dead ends for me. I've listened to that tape so many times, and it's killing me.
There is another person on the tapes, though, that seems to be pretty close to Volkskrieger.
No, I'm liking you as well. You seem to know what you're doing, which is good.
It's the guy who calls himself Advocate Cannibalism. You heard part of his vetting interview earlier.
Yeah, I know how to fuck people up with minimum physical exertion.
Well, after that interview wraps up, Volkskrieger and advocate cannibalism just start shooting the breeze.
You're right, mate. Yeah, you know, Bono. Yeah, fuck. Yeah. No, it's funny, man. Like, 'cause that's what you say. Yeah.
It becomes clear that they're both from Perth,
As far as I knew, he was based out Canning way.
and that they've met in person at Hyde Park in the city.
I probably would have picked a different location.
If he knows Volkskrieger personally, it's even more important to track this guy down. There's something else though. Advocate cannibalism's racism feels like it's on another level. I've heard a lot of racist talk on these tapes, but this is new.
I'm not really into gore. I'm kind of desensitized to it.
During the vetting interview, he told the leadership that he'd eaten meals while watching a video of the Christchurch massacre.
I got more enjoyment watching St. Tarrant do his thing. But I've eaten several meals watching that. Sorry, it was where I was born, so I have a very sentimental connection to Christchurch.
Advocate cannibalism also isn't nearly as careful as Volkskrieger.
Well, I'm in the middle of doing a security course about to become a security
He
officer.
easily name drops other groups he's joined, groups that I know about, like the Lad Society and Order 15.
I have been part of several white nationalist movements. I was the Southern Hemisphere organizer for Order 15.
He tells them he goes by what seems like a fake name, James Jamison.
If you look on their website, they'll have a Hall of Fame. Anything involving the Perth Houseboys, West Australia, or James Jamison, you will see me.
There's a guy calling himself James Jamison in a since-deleted Order 15 Facebook group. Anti-fascist researchers, the White Rose Society, have sent me photos of the membership lists, and with the lists, a photo of James Jamison. His head is shaved, mainly bald, with a scraggly grey-flecked beard. Having a photo is helpful, but the best clue that I've got to finding out where he lives is this garbled piece of tape.
If you're in Perth, man, like, I'm like, you know, at Dogs Pockets.
Oh, fuck yeah, you're nice and close to me then.
Yeah, I'm literally over the road from the Swastika Flats.
As someone who didn't grow up in Perth, whatever landmark they're talking about here is a mystery to me. So I send a copy of the audio to a few colleagues in Perth, and I get an answer back straight away. I call Jason Wilson and play him the audio again to jog his memory. So there's this bit at the start, I'll just play it again, just the top part.
If you're in Perth, man, like, I'm like, you know, at Dogs Pockets. I remember listening to it, yeah, but I didn't, I just thought, that's not coming back.
I thought maybe he said the word pub or something, so I showed just this little snippet to a couple of colleagues here at the ABC, and they said that what he's actually saying is dog swamp. He says, do you know dog swamp? Have a listen to this.
I'm like, you know, at Dogs Pockets.
Do you know where dog swamp is?
You know, at Dogs Pockets. Oh, fuck yeah. Yeah, that's what he's saying.
And then, get this, he's quite specific about this next bit.
Yeah, I'm literally over the road from the Swastika Flats. Literally over the road from the swamp.
Yeah. Where the flats are.
Yeah.
Where the flats are.
Oh, nice.
So...
Nice. Yeah, that's good. See, you cannot beat this local knowledge.
And that's how I ended up here, in a car parked next to a swamp at the back of a shopping centre. The apartment block here is, it's got a metal fence about chest high that wraps around the front of the place. There's a supermarket trolley that's just been left out the front. And across the road is the dog swamp reserve. There's a car coming outside now. But there are 44 apartments in this complex, and exactly which one advocate cannibalism or James Jamison or whatever his name is lives in is still totally unclear. I go back to the office and hit the phones. In the space of one morning, I make almost 80 calls. That is until someone calls me back with a tip. And I've just got off the phone with someone, and they've told me which unit he lives in. It's a huge break. This time, I am nearly, dare I say, 100% sure that we have a home address for James Jamison, and that means we're in a position to go and knock on the door and say hi and ask a few questions. I can't believe we've actually got to this point. We now know exactly which unit he lives in. In his vetting interview for the base, he said he's a licensed firearm owner, that he has access to properties to shoot on, and that he's trained in martial arts. So I don't want to take any risks. When I go back to Dog Swamp, this time, I don't want to go alone. Just so I'm not like right in the view of his place. Is it sort of something like this? Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, cool. So we're just standing outside the house now of James Jamison. We know which unit he lives in. I've got to admit that I'm a little bit nervous. We've got a security guard who's here with us just to give me some backup. But this guy obviously has a background in martial arts. I've seen photos of his knives. He's a registered firearm owner. And so, yeah, I think we have to be careful. And I just hope that everything works out okay. I head into the complex with the security guard to find the right apartment. Okay, so we're just walking down here and I can recognise all of these fences. These look really familiar from the photos that I've seen online. And, okay, the gate's open and I'm just going to go up and knock on the door. There's a security camera. The law in WA means we can't make recordings of other people on private property, so at this point I had to turn my mic off. A few minutes later, as I was walking out of the complex, I turned my mic back on. If you listen carefully, in the background, you can hear James scream out as I leave. Okay, so we've just spoken to James Jamison. It's definitely him. He said he's not involved in this stuff anymore. And he really begged us not to basically use the information that we've found about him. He asked me if I used to work for Hack, which I did. And he actually paid me a compliment. He said, I used to really like your stuff, which was a bit unusual. And then he asked if I could come over a bit closer to him, and I said, no, it's okay, I can hear you from over here. Say anything you want from over behind your door. And he said, don't do it. Don't publish this stuff. And then he just screamed, fuck, and slammed the door. So I don't know what he's thinking in there now, but we should probably go. I left some more detailed questions for James in his letterbox, but he never got back to me. Although I found out where he lives, I'm still not sure what his real name is, if it's not James Jamison. So if you know more about James Jamison, or even more importantly, if you have Volkskrieger's real identity, contact our team confidentially by secure email, backgroundbriefing@protonmail.com. Or you can reach us through Signal or WhatsApp on the number 0491 750 876. That's 0491 750 876. In the next episode of Background Briefing, in part 2 of the base tapes, I'll continue the search for Volkskrieger, and I'll show how the base groomed young men for their mission.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
I'm not 18 yet. That's not an issue, I didn't think.
So these younger guys, I like them. I look at them as guys that we should help develop because they're sort of going to be the vanguard in the future.
I wouldn't say I'm old enough to be into the proper real world yet.
We would be looking for people who, are open to the more extreme sort of side of the ideology. People who could be easily swayed.
Some people call that radicalization.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty appropriate term for it.
If you want me to be the boogeyman, then I guess I'm the fucking boogeyman as well, because I fully, wholeheartedly agree with what he did.
This group is seeking to mimic the ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This is the group that we need to watch and could likely be the perpetrators behind the next big mass casualty attack. We need to act now on this.
Background Briefing sound producers are Lila Schunner and Ingrid Wagner. Sound engineering by Isabella Tropiano and fact-checking by Benjamin Sveen. And a very special thank you for the additional reporting by Kevin Ewan from the New South Wales newsroom. Legal advice from Lynette Husserini, Pierce Hardigan and Deb Orkiniki. Our editorial policies advisor is Mark Maley. The supervising producer is Tim Roxburgh, and our executive producer is Alice Brennan. I'm Alex Mann.
Okay, that was the third time I've heard that. I heard it just after midnight on Sunday night. I heard it at 8 o'clock, 8:05 in the morning on Sunday. Neo-Nazi drop bears. I mean, a drop bear is not actually a thing in the sense that there are no such animals as carnivorous koalas that leap down out of the trees in the middle of the night and eat tourists. It's fun to wind them up overseas visitors with the idea of it, particularly if they're a gullible BBC television journalist. You know, you can freak them right out. I personally actually have a coherent hypothesis, which is, kind of being tested. I haven't quote tested it. Over there's a weather station. The weather station is pretty much impossible for anything to damage unless the damage comes from the top. And one morning there, the weather station was over there and the anemometer was broken off. One arm was broken off the wind, the compass directions. I had to spend an afternoon gluing it back together to make it go again. And it took me quite a while to figure out what had done that. And the answer came to me was that it was a sugar glider, which is like a little tiny lightweight possum with a long furry tail. And they have a membrane that runs from the back of their wrists, so to speak, to the front of their ankles. And if they stick their arms forward and they stick their legs back with both of them out, they get the effective plan form area of not quite a rectangle, but at least a square. And that gives them enough wing surface area that they can glide at about 45 degrees, or 1 foot forward for 1 foot down, 1 metre forward for 1 metre down. And they glide from the top of one tree to the base of the next. And what's gone on with my weather station is that a sugar glider has taken off from the top of a tree, and it's not until it's just about to touch down that it realised that it's not landing in a tree, it's landing on a plastic weather station made in China. And it's smashed the weather station to pieces with the impact of it, because weather stations are not designed to have maybe 1/4 of a kilo of possum hit it from above. And it's either fallen to the ground or it's moved on. Well, the glide ratio supports the idea, the landscape supports the idea, and that's what I think a drop bear is. I think people have been out in the forest at night and a sugar glider has mistaken the tourist's head for the top of a rock or a tree stump or something. And just think about it, if something hits you in the back of the head or the top corner of the head, and suddenly you get at least 8 little tiny needle sharp claws on the 4 corners of your head in bunches of 4, 16, because there'll be 4 at the front and 4 at the back, digging into your scalp as the terrified sugar glider repositions itself, and then it'll kick off in the direction of the darkest patch of shadow, because it knows it can only go a couple of meters from the top of a person's head. It's got to get out of sight. So the subjective experience of the tourist in the forest has been to get hit on the head, grabbed by 4 little claws, and then kicked by 2 more of the claws. maybe with some hair pulling and squealing along the way. So if they're really lucky, they might show up afterwards with scratches that don't really require Band-Aid, but they'll leak a little bit of blood. And thus the legend of the drop bear has been born. But what we have here now, according to the ABC and the investigative journalists, who one must assume, as a government-funded independent broadcaster, one must assume that this has all been run past the Department of Homeland Security, which used to be Peter Dutton's job until he got bumped to being the Attorney General because Christian Porter's still got this. It may be an unproved, but it's also an indefensible historical rape allegation against him. Therefore, he's no longer fit to be the Attorney General because he brings the office into disrepute merely by the fact that even if he didn't do what he's accused of doing, at least in his memory, he didn't do what he's accused of doing. The whole idea that you could perhaps possibly have a teenage rapist who grew up to become the Attorney General and then plays with the puppet strings in order to prevent further prosecution by law. It's just too odious for the system to put up with. So, yeah, he's been shifted. And an indication of how lowly is the subject of science with the Morrison government is that Christian Porter is now Australia's Minister for Industry, Science and Technology, right at the bottom of the heap. So the new lady in charge of Homeland Security, she's come in just as Background Briefing releases this, I find it stunning, surveillance evidence of the activity of white supremacist, genocidal neo-Nazis recruiting from Western Australia. And I don't know many people in Western Australia, but I have got one YouTube co-subscriber over there, name of VB Ed. And he's an accountant. He went to a private school. His father used to have a factory that built agricultural equipment in the wheat belt before the wheat belt dried up and went away. He's pretty well off. He's just pulled off yet another success, or he's pulling off yet another successful land financial busyness deal. And he used to be a big supporter of the Liberal Party, and then he sort of got a bit into One Nation, and then he sort of got a bit into Fraser Anning. I know about the time of the Egg Boy incident, he was ducking for cover because of some help that he'd given Fraser Anning, and he appeared in the credits on some little snippet of video that Fraser Anning had put together. You didn't like that, did you, Ed? Well, I'm wondering whether your mate in the Gold Coast and the bloke in the Gold Coast who's tied into this base and the people in Western Australia who are tied into this base, are they anything to do with the new fairly radical political organisation that you were talking about having encountered perhaps a bit before COVID, say a year and a half ago? Like basically, what do you know about Volkskrieg? Eddie, are he a mate of yours? Or would he be a mate of Stuffy's? Or Fraser Anning's? It's a bit of a worry. I mean, I suppose it's been paralleled by the rise of neo-fascists in the excited status of Norte Americano, all the people who reckon that democracy is no fucking good because they keep getting outvoted, therefore they've just got to take over by force. Like the insurrectionists on the 6th of January. And got 5 minutes or so to go. A couple of my subscribers have asked me what I think is happening in America. One of the blokes I eat with on a Friday night, he also wants to know, when's all this stuff going to happen that you say is going to happen? I have to say, I don't know when, but I got a feeling as to what. And I greatly underestimated how slowly one presidential regime changes to the new one in the excited status. So it wasn't until after Biden's choice of candidate for the Attorney General on a federal level had been approved by Congress and Senate actually taken over the reins of power that he could even commence to begin. As far as I'm aware at the moment, 300 or 400 people have been arrested and charged with what they call holding charges, minor things that are really easy to prove. And they've been let go on bail, and those would be the people who have no prior conviction for anything. They're clean skins. And those are the people who don't feature in any of the video as being right up the front doing horrible stuff. There's about another maybe 150 who've been arrested and they've been held on remand, and that's because they've got prior convictions, or it's because they were seen doing wicked, evil, nasty stuff. There's another at least 150 or maybe 250 people who the dots are still being connected up, the I's are being dotted, the T's are being crossed. It's all happening slowly, but I have noticed the last month, the people who keep appearing in my feed from the American regional news stations as, a man from here has been charged, a woman from there has been charged, little 2 or 3 minute grabs. The ones who are getting charged most recently or who are having upgrades to their charges added, they're not getting let out anymore. I personally expect that they're going to have a purge, and Homeland Security and the FBI and probably the National Guard will go out there, and all of the people who have yet to be arrested, including the instigators and the organisers and the choreographers and the people who thought it was a great idea, the propagandists, the facilitators, Congress, and I think it was Congress people who were running guided tours, or maybe it was senators who were running guided tours of the Capitol building during the COVID restrictions when there were no tours. And then the people who were on the tours days later showed up as rioters. I think a lot of people are going to be collected in the middle of the night, in the best of authoritarian, tyrannical, dictatorial, purging type operations. You get the whole bloody lot of them all in one go. You don't give them a chance to run away one at a time. But by the same token, the 350 or 500 or however many have been caught and released and let go, they were bagged and tagged and flagged and let go so they could be surveilled, to make it easier to connect the dots on the 150 or 250 who have yet to have charges pressed against them. I'm pretty sure the original plot, as cooked up by Steve Bannon and General Stone and Roger Stone and General Flynn, maybe Jared Kushner, Donald Trump, DJ, TJ, the crew of cretins who thought they could get away with this. The idea was, as soon as they had a congressman and or a senator in handcuffs, a vice president perhaps, then declare the state of emergency, proclaim martial law, suspend the constitution for the duration of the emergency, and put the election results in abeyance until after the emergency, and immediately do what happened on the night of the Long Knives, when all of a sudden the Sturmabteilung and Ernst Röhm were declared to be traitors working against the National Socialists, and their leadership were killed and the rest were subsumed into the SS. The Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Vigilantes, the people who spearheaded the invasion of the capital, they were going to be branded as Antifa and Black Lives Matter imposters and agents provocateur, and they were all going to be executed fairly quickly in the new regime. And then everybody who was considered not to be a Trumpist would be purged and poked in a FEMA camp and re-educated. I think that was kind of the ultimate goal of the people that I just named. Maybe wrong, maybe so, I don't know. And while Trump was in power, the wannabes over here in Australia thought that they were on the winning side, and they've obviously shown their hand way too far. If private investigative journalists have been able to catch them and bust them like that and make them look as silly as they did. Anyway, such is life. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.